Today, we're thrilled to host Nicole Arzt, a seasoned psychotherapist from Southern California. With over a decade of clinical experience, Nicole is the founder of Soul Therapy and the creative force behind psychotherapy memes. She's also the author of Sometimes Therapy is Awkward. In our conversation, we'll explore Nicole's journey, her unique contributions to the mental health community, and insights from her book. We'll touch upon the importance of therapists engaging in their own therapeutic process, the challenges faced by newer therapists, and the evolving landscape of mental health. Nicole will also share thoughts on ethical considerations in therapy, the stigma around therapists seeking therapy, and the vital role of self-care. So stay tuned. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Mindful Space. Today we have Nicole Arzt with us. How are you, Nicole?
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Thank you for making this happen. I must say I am a fan. I follow your page on Instagram for a while now, and as a therapist, I can 100% assure everyone that you are super funny. Like I was always able to relate to your memes, so that's just an FYI. Fun fact about me, I'm a fan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I know the page. It's called Psychotherapy Memes. It has grown to be this, amongst the community, the therapist community, a big thing, right? What inspired you to create this account? How did it start, and how do you see it contributing to the mental health field?
Sure. Yeah. So the page, it's coming on 5 years now, which is still kind of surreal to me. I started the page just kind of as a joke, honestly. I was working a full time at a like community mental health type site and also running a private practice on the side. So I know a lot of therapists can relate to what that grind feels like. Just trying to get by, trying to make it as a therapist. And yeah, the page was anonymous for a couple of years. I was just making memes as kind of a way to probably like looking back on it, just kind of like emotionally cope with some of the rigor of the work and try and make sense of it. And over time, it seems that more and more people resonated with the content, and it kind of organically on its own has become this really awesome, supportive community of just a very shared collective mental health experience among therapists and among some clients too, who um, get to kind of peek to see what being a therapist is about.
I remember when your account was anonymous, and I remember people trying to ask you, like, who are you? What do you do? And I love that you were
Yeah.
just kind of like left and right. And I know one of the issues as a therapist is we kind of try to keep our professional life separate to our humorous personal life. So I was, once you came out, it was like, okay, this is the face of the Instagram. I remember it was like a big thing. I was like, oh, wow, okay. So it's like a normal therapist, a normal female therapist. It could be anyone. I loved
Yeah,
it.
yeah, always mindful of the crossing over of like some personal with professional and being very mindful of the role that humor plays in therapy, but how it can also be misconstrued. And there's a
Mhm.
lot to be said about that too. And so that's always kind of
Yeah.
a consideration as I post content and share ideas on there.
Yeah. I mean, we can do a whole other podcast if we talk about that, but it's a different
Sure.
topic. Um, I know you've written a book. There's the debut of Sometimes Therapy is Awkward, and it addresses the taboos of therapists receiving therapists. And that will be our focus, our main focus of our conversation today.
Mhm.
Can you discuss some of these taboos that maybe you've seen? Why is it important to therapists to engage in their own therapeutic process?
It's such a loaded, complex question because I think on the surface, it's very easy for us to say, yeah, of course, therapists should go to their own therapy. That's how we learn. That's how we process
Yeah.
our hard days. That's how we understand what it's like to be on the other side of the so-called couch. But in real life, I think what happens is a lot of therapists they feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed, they think they should have it all together. They worry about their own therapist judging their competence as therapists. They worry about confidentiality. They worry about their therapist seeing them at like professional events. There's a lot of different things that come into it. Sometimes there's therapist ego, right? Like, oh, I should know what to do because I'm a therapist, or what if I know more than my therapist, things of that nature. So there's definitely some barriers that get in the way of therapists kind of pursuing their own treatment, their own self
Mm-hmm.
exploration. Um, but it is such a benefit to do that work for yourself. And we could definitely talk about that too.
Yeah.
It is probably one of the biggest personal and professional benefits that we can give ourselves in this work is being active participants in our own therapeutic work. I truly believe that at every stage of the career. Not to say you always need to be in therapy. That's too much of a
Yeah.
generalization, but we're only human too. And we have our own life stuff that comes up, and we have our own mental health struggles, our own skeletons, our own traumas, our own relationship stuff. And we need that space to work through it. If we don't, it comes out one way or another, whether that's at home, through our work,
Mm-hmm.
through our interactions with clients.
Yeah.
It comes out.
I mean, we're
Hmm.
all human beings, right? And we all go through experiences. And I always say, well, if a surgeon could do surgery on themselves, then, it's the same thing. I
Yes.
feel the same concept. Like a doctor needs another doctor to get checked. So
Yes.
a therapist needs
Absolutely.
another therapist. And like you said, it doesn't have to be like an always thing. It could, maybe you went through, maybe going through grief or divorce, or like something could have triggered.
Mhm.
But there is that taboo of, well, you're a therapist, you should know what to do in regards to
Mhm.
everything. On top of reading
Yeah.
minds. I always
Oh
get
my
that
gosh,
one. Are you
absolutely.
reading my mind right now? It's like, no, if I could read minds, I would not be a therapist.
Absolutely. I would channel that into some other pursuits,
Yeah,
probably more financially lucrative ones, right?
exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. In your private practice, correct me if I'm wrong, you specialize in treating complex trauma and existential
Mhm.
stressors. How did you develop
Mhm.
this specialization? Sorry, my Latina side comes out sometimes. And what drew you to work in this field?
When I started this journey a decade ago, I don't feel like there was nearly as much emphasis on the role that trauma plays in mental health, in well being, and just essentially so much of who we are as people. We've definitely gotten better, I think, on a societal level of really
Hmm.
understanding the implications of trauma. But as I remember first starting in this field working with clients, it was so easy to just look at like a presenting diagnosis and then like have a prescription for what treatment would look like, and then wonder, well, why are these clients not getting better? Why are they regressing? Why is everybody calling them resistant? Why are they still struggling with drug use, eating disorders, abusive relationships, all of that? And it all so many times came down to the phenomenon of trauma and just unprocessed trauma, unresolved trauma, and its residual symptoms. And so it became pretty apparent to me that more and more like we need very compassionate, skilled trauma treatment for people, because if we're only focusing on the outward like DSM, mental health symptoms, we're missing such a scope of how their childhood, how their past, how those early relationships really inform the current manifestation of how people are trying to survive, which is easy to say that's maladaptive. That's how you're trying to survive. But really, everybody's just trying to mitigate their pain and cope. And so,
Hmm. Yes.
so much of, as I'm sure you can see in your practice and any therapist listening to this, like trauma is such a big undercurrent. And it felt very important to me to focus my efforts on that. And with that coming a lot of existential grief and a lot of existential anxiety, like who are we in this world, what's the purpose, why is there so much pain and suffering, why does any of it matter if I'm going to die, if my loved ones are going to die? And at this point, the majority of my clients are therapists themselves, and
Hmm.
I'm the first one to admit there's a lot of trauma within the providers. A lot of us go into this field because we've had our own hardships, our own experiences with just difficult life experiences. And so being able to be that person to support other therapists who've had those types of backgrounds is very rewarding and
Yeah.
important to me.
What led you to, on top of, having this trauma focus, um, really focus on other therapists? I'm curious.
That happened more unexpectedly. I do attribute some of the work on Instagram through the psychotherapy memes of building um, essentially a presence with other therapists.
Okay.
It also became pretty apparent that a lot of therapists struggle to find their own therapist, that being its own barrier. And so I think that page, for better or worse, has created some relatability.
Hmm.
Potential clients had reached out. Are you accepting new clients? Like, I like what you have to say. I do like Q&As. I do stories of that nature on
Hmm.
there. And it led to people reaching out to me and asking, like, can I work with you? I would want to find a therapist, or
Like,
you've
you get what
helped me
I'm
really.
going through. Can you be my therapist?
Kinda, yeah, absolutely. And then with the book, that kind of opened its own floodgates. What emerged to me is that there's just this whole generation of therapists who are struggling with a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of burnout, a lot of uncertainty about this field,
Hmm.
on top of their own personal stuff, like what we said, with the complex
Yeah.
trauma, with the existential stuff, the anxiety, but just these macro issues in our field, and wanting to work with someone. I mean, I get it. I
Yeah.
went through all those things. I still go through
Yes.
them. And I think it can be really validating to connect with someone who, I don't want to say I get it 100%. Nobody ever gets anything 100%, but I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid to go
Okay.
there with people. And I
Yeah.
love working with other therapists. I find it, again, it wasn't my original plan, but
It just found
that's how it
you.
shaped. Yeah. Yeah. And it's been the best, truly, such a reward.
Yeah. And for those that are listening that do not know what imposter syndrome is basically
Right.
when we're treating a client and we feel like we're the imposters. Like we feel like we're not servicing you. We're just, again, we're faking it, or we feel like we're not really being that therapeutic for your process.
Yeah. Yeah, or that, like, you're fraudulent in some
Hmm.
way, inferior compared to other clinicians.
Hmm.
I had that joke when I was younger, like, "Oh, this person really needs a therapist." And it's like, "Oh shit, that's me. I'm the therapist," type of thing. And I don't think it's a unique. I mean, I know it's not a unique phenomenon to therapists. You hear about it in all different kinds of industries.
Yeah.
Therapists are willing to talk about it more and more, especially more than I feel like they used to, but it's uncomfortable. It's absolutely an uncomfortable, experience to go through.
Yeah. And you might feel very uncomfortable just sharing it with another
Mhm.
colleague. So I could
Yeah,
see how the
yeah,
taboo goes in there too, where I don't want to tell you that I don't feel like a real therapist.
yeah,
So having, somebody to confide in, just like any other human being, can be very, it could be good for you. So
I
I
think
love
so.
that. Now, given your focus on supporting your new
Mhm.
therapist, what are some unique challenges that they commonly encounter, like as a new therapist? How can they navigate these challenges successfully?
Imposter syndrome being a big one,
Hmm.
burnout being another big one. Um, there's a lot of, pressure that new therapists sometimes put on themselves, but also the systems put on them, like high demands for productivity, the expectation that you should, like, know how to treat every presenting issue. So I think one of the first things that's important for me to say is, some of the issues transcend an individual. Like, we're looking at macro systems here, and I don't think it's fair for a therapist to assume that they need to do all the self-care and that will somehow fix, like, these, like, exploited problems that happen in the field, fraudulent problems that happen in the field, that exists. Boundaries obviously are important, knowing what's,
Hmm.
your boundaries to take care of yourself personally and professionally. I can't emphasize having support. That's so important.
Yeah.
A good supervisor, a good group of colleagues that you really trust. It doesn't have to be a numbers game. It can just be a few people, but those people that you can really go to when you're struggling with clients, with yourself, with how do I what do I do and how do I do it type of thing. Um, and some self-compassion is such an
Yeah.
important piece, remembering that I think it's really common for therapists to look at themselves and then compare themselves to the clinician who's been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years. And yeah, when you do that, of course you're going to feel inferior, you're going to feel kind of
Hmm.
clumsy, but you are in some ways. You just don't have that time and experience yet. And so kind of being on just grounding of where you are in your journey. I'm very much a believer in staying very growth oriented,
Yeah.
um,
You will get
constantly being in
there.
motion. You will get there if
Yeah.
you're intentional, if you practice intentionally, if you're in a growth state of learning, if you're pursuing trainings, classes, workshops, podcasts, books, whatever you can get your hands on, like embrace being a
Yeah.
sponge, try and absorb. Um, that's always been so important to me.
One of the concepts that new therapists and actually all therapists have to deal with is the countertransference. So
Sure.
let's discuss that, what it is for our listeners that might not be therapists. And when it comes to referring to the emotional reaction to clients, how do we navigate between using your own therapeutic experience to emphasize clients and ensuring that it doesn't influence in the therapeutic process?
I mean, we could write books on this topic,
Yeah.
right? I won't pretend to have like the universal answer. So, simply, yes, countertransference refers to the emotional reactions that a therapist has in response to a client.
Hmm.
We can nuance it to show themes of negative countertransference, which can be presented as feeling kind of a sense of dread or boredom or like irritability towards a client, even if you don't outwardly show it. So it's like inner feelings of being annoyed of some sort, like, or being happy if they cancel, those types of things. And then positive countertransference being more like you really enjoy your time with that client. Maybe you over identify with some of their story. Maybe you feel the sense of protectiveness. I think it's a misconception that either one's good or bad. They just are, they're natural
Yeah.
reactions. We are emotional people, and our clients, for better or worse, can remind us of people in our own life. They can remind us of parts of ourselves. They can remind us of parts of people we wish we were. All that
Yeah.
stuff comes into play. How you work with it really, and I always tell therapists this, it really depends on your modality and how you choose to be as a therapist. Sometimes therapists are going to be more transparent about their emotions with the client. That may also depend on the type of relationship you have with your client. And other times it is going to be a matter of really being mindful of those reactions when they emerge and having a good space to process them in
Hmm.
supervision and consultation, things like that. So you're not taking it out and displacing it on the client, because
Yeah.
then it's more about your needs than theirs. And that's not how we want to structure treatment.
Yeah.
Um, but it's very nuanced, it's very complicated. So I don't know if I answered everything
Yeah.
or
No,
just
I mean,
created more questions. Maybe I did, but
you
it's a
did.
whole
Yeah.
thing to unpack.
Yeah, no, I think what's important to mention, at least for new therapists, is that it's something normal. Um, we
Mhm.
normalize it, and it doesn't mean you have to refer the client out right away, right? You can
No, no.
process your own thing, again, seek a therapist, and really
Mhm.
see what that means, to you before just giving
Yeah.
up on that client.
Yes, absolutely. Because it can be actually very rich, like you said, even with your own therapist to explore. Because if you're really having intense reactions to someone, well, what's potentially unresolved in your life, or
Hmm.
what is it about that specific personality that is something that's hitting really close to you?
Yeah. Like
That
you're
can be its
kind of
own.
like my dad right now. What's happening? It's
Yeah,
like, okay,
totally,
it's
and you don't wanna run the risk of, like, "You remind me of my dad, so I'm gonna treat you like you're my dad," because
exactly.
that's not therapy. That's, again, about reenacting your own needs, which we have to be mindful of as therapists.
Yes.
At the same thing, countertransference can be quite beautiful because it reminds us that we are human and we genuinely have emotions towards our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of clients come to therapy thinking, "Oh, like, I just pay you, you don't really care. Um, you just show up and forget about me." But no, we absolutely don't. We
Yeah.
we are invested, we care, and we really, really want to see our clients
Yeah.
enjoy their life and feel cared for.
Thrive. I mean, I know I have a lot of people that ask me like, how can you listen to all these problems and not get affected? Or how do you, see suicidal patients or people that are depressed and just kind of go home on
Mhm.
or go on with your day? And it's like, well, you know, takes practice, I guess. Like if I were to take everything from my clients home, I would definitely be also depressed and suicidal. So it's hard, especially when you're starting as a new therapist, to be able to, I don't know, like wear many different hats and kind of take one
Mhm.
down and put one up. But it's
Yep.
normal. It's a normal feeling and it might happen sometimes.
Totally.
So
Totally. And something I always tell people is like sometimes you're gonna take it home and that doesn't make you a bad therapist. It means you are a human who was in a human experience. It would be weird
yeah.
if someone was highly depressed and suicidal and you just completely shut yourself off from it,
Yeah.
you know? So it is that balancing act of like, yeah, we're therapists, but we're also humans. And so we're gonna get affected by the stuff
Hmm.
that someone's doing. At the same time, you're right. We can't
Yeah.
if everything we take home with us, we would
Oh
never
my
be able
God.
to move through our lives
Yeah.
or actually help our clients objectively. So,
Yeah, it wouldn't benefit anyone. That's what we're supposed to be, the biased person, right? Like I am
yes.
invested in you and I'm going to help you, but I'm able to remove myself from the situation because if I'm grieving your grief or whatever it is, just giving an
Mhm.
example, then I'm not able to guide you towards healing.
Correct.
So sometimes
Correct.
just easier said than done. So I just want to put it out there, normalize
Correct.
it. It's a normal thing, guys.
Totally. Totally. It's totally easier said than done. And it takes practice, like you said. It takes a lot of practice.
How, when we talk about taboos and stigmas and amongst therapists, new
Mhm.
therapists, old therapists, how do you envision breaking down the stigma around therapists seeking therapy? How can the culture normalize this thing?
I want to be optimistic here. I think we've gotten a lot better. I want to say we're at a good point in time with
Hmm.
it. We probably still have a ways to go. I know like a lot of schools, for example, require their students to go to
Yes.
therapy. So it's
Hmm.
very normalized. I think that's a good thing. I do social media has shown a lot of people now will openly talk about going to their therapist and like stuff they learn from their therapist. I think that's also a really beautiful thing. Um, I think just more transparency and more normal what's the word I'm thinking of? Like validating when someone is
Yeah.
saying like, "Yeah, I'm going to therapy." And it's like, "Yeah, that's awesome. Good for you. Like I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself." Um but like I said, I do feel optimistic about it. I think, like, especially with the newer generations of therapists, they seem much more open and willing to talk about their mental health than I feel even like a decade ago when I was first starting that
Yeah.
people were. And that's gotten better with every generation. And I have a lot of faith in the youth of today's
Yeah.
world that they're just
Me
more open about that kind
too.
of stuff. It's
Yes, me too. I
wonderful.
mean,
Yeah.
they keep talking about it. There's more and more podcast programs, books. It's definitely
Yeah.
getting um normalized to talk about therapists or say, I have a therapist. Let me recommend you my therapist, whether I
Mhm.
feel like before, like you said, not too long ago, saying that you had a therapist was almost like, what's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? I think we can also make an argument for more accessibility. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
therapy can be
Yes.
expensive, cost prohibitive, even if you have like all those things come into play. Most therapists starting out are just not making a lot of money. And so to say, "Oh, go to therapy," can almost be like ingenuous if someone's really like struggling to pay their rent. So
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, it's always been really important to have a couple like pay what you can slots, sliding scale slots. I'm pretty well connected with the community, so I have a lot of referrals to people who do provide very low cost therapy. And I know there's a few organizations that specialize specifically in like low cost. I think it's like Therapy Collective or Therapists for Therapy, like those resources. So
Mm-hmm.
we're giving back to our community because realistically, not everybody can pay a full cash pay rate when they're not making much money from the get go.
I completely agree. I think, there's this big debate. Do we take insurance, private pay, all these things? And it's kind of sad, right? Because we're in the mental health field to help people, but then we also have to pay our rent and our bills, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
especially once you open your own private practice. So,
Hmm.
it's another world out there. And for the client, the
Hmm.
same, right? And it makes sense that they want to use their insurance. You're paying all this money,
Yeah.
and then somebody tells you,
Yeah.
well, you still have to pay for therapy. It's like, well, I'm already, at least in the United States, I'm paying a
Yeah.
lot for my insurance. I want to be able to use
Totally.
it. And then we go into the whole, well, is it billable or not billable? That's another podcast.
Mhm.
That's another issue
Yeah.
in the
It's
system.
complicated.
But no, I completely agree with you. That's definitely a big and important factor. And I see
Mhm.
it all the time
Yep.
as well.
Yes.
I know we kind of touched upon and we said that therapists should really be aware, look within and take care of themselves, right? Self-care. Can we go a little bit
Mhm.
deeper into that? What is the importance of it, and how do you recommend therapists to practice self-care?
Yeah. So, self-care is an interesting concept because I think it's pretty misunderstood and like kind of been co-opted and overly commercialized. I really do.
Yes.
I think self-care is not just about always making yourself feel happy or like treating yourself. It's not about that. It is a deep reflection of what do I need? What's being neglected in my life? And sometimes self-care also means like I might not be able to take care of that right now because I have pressing needs, but I'm really going to start to prioritize that. I'm going to make an effort. And so self-care being the total comprehensive health of self. And so we know that that's physical, emotional, interpersonal, spiritual, financial. So it's a lot of things. And so with that, I always say like it's never usually just one strategy. Although you can start with one strategy is the paradox, right? And so like little movements matter. So trying to be a little bit more mindful as you move through daily life, making like an effort to connect with friends. Like support's one of the big ones, I think, of
Mm-hmm.
self-care. Like we need to be socially connected, particularly as therapists who can run the risk of being isolated if they're in their own practices or like falsely borrowing intimacy almost from like the interactions with their clients, which are not the same as like their own replenishing personal relationships. Listening to your body, which I will always say is easier said than done, but with that, like sleeping
Yes.
when you need to sleep, eating when you need to eat, resting when you need to rest. Again, easier said than done, but it's kind of the like, can we practice what we preach our clients to do? And can we also be self compassionate like we would with our clients when we don't do those things? Because that's also part of self care, right? Is knowing that we're human and or all just trying to figure it out. And sometimes we'll act in ways where later we're like, that wasn't probably the best choice, but
Yeah.
can we still be kind to ourselves and use that as a learning opportunity rather than this excuse to like totally beat on ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's self-care in that vein is more of this very holistic, comprehensive set of ideals rather than just like, okay, go take a bubble bath, go get a manicure. Not to say those things don't
I'm gonna go
matter,
get a
they do.
massage. That's my
Uh-huh. But
self-care,
it's like what yeah, but it's not like if you're gonna get the massage, that's great. And but is that also is that really good? Is that what
of
you
course.
need? Because sometimes you do need the massage, but sometimes
Sometimes you
you need
just need a
other
10-minute break. You have a lot
things.
of work, you're overwhelmed, and overworking, like you said, leads to burnout. And I'm gonna go for
Mhm.
a 10-minute walk. And like that right there could be
Yeah,
self-care, you know?
and
Doesn't have to
self-care
be
can
this
totally
big thing, like you're saying, activity
yeah,
or a trip or 10
mhm,
massages. But yes, we encourage massage, but it's not the only way of
yeah.
self-care.
No, and again, I'm really about, like, accessibility and realistic
Mm-hmm.
expectations, and I'm not naive to, like, not everyone can afford a massage, you know, or has, like, time for that, or, like, they have young children, you know, and so
Yes.
it's also about, okay, what else? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is creating, like, big toolkit of things
Yeah.
that you can kinda grab and reference when you're noticing yourself needing to rejuvenate.
Yeah. No, I mean, it could definitely become very stressful in this field. So self-care is should be a number one priority because, they always tell you, cliche, if you're not good, then how are you gonna do good to other people, right? Or airplanes, put your
Mhm.
mask first and then the rest of the people, then your kids. You need to be
Yeah.
okay to be able to take care of other people. So in the therapy
Yes.
world, that definitely applies as well.
It's not always the guaranteed fix. Like sometimes we're just going to be sad or stressed or angry. And there's something to be said about also just accepting those emotions for their
Mm-hmm.
necessary function. That's also a form of self-care, paradoxically, is saying, in this moment, like, I'm sad, and like that's okay. Like, I'm just sad. And I don't need to try and like self-care my way out of that.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
Yeah.
kind of feel it. Don't just avoid it by self-care. Don't use
Yeah. Yeah. I
self-care
think we,
to um mask not going through the
yeah.
emotions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be mindful of that, that we should be trying to improve our well-being. That's always important. But sometimes life is hard. And sometimes we're gonna be sad, or we're gonna be angry, we're gonna be whatever we want to consider those negative emotions to be. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of freedom, and sometimes just honoring that for what that is too.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Um, Another one of the topics I know we discussed briefly, like therapists are supposed to have everything figured out or we're supposed to know it all. Um, Another one would be disclosing their own life or mental health journey.
Mhm.
And I know there's a lot of debate on that subject. What are your thoughts on ethical considerations for therapists sharing their personal experience? Because I mean, I've heard it all. I know
Yeah.
I like to share if I find it appropriately or I find it like it's going to help my client heal or kind of like, you know, be like, okay, if she went through it, everybody goes through it. I'm not alone in this world. But I know
Yeah.
every therapist uses this different differently. And some of them have a rule where like I just don't share anything. They won't put a photo in the
Mhm.
office. They're just like, nope, you know nothing about me. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I'm gonna contribute to the debate because it depends, which is our famous therapy phrase. I I don't self-disclose nearly as much as I think a lot of therapists do. It's just not my style. With that, if clients ask personal questions, I tend to answer them. So that is a form of self-disclosure, but it
Okay.
gives the client the autonomy to ask, or if I sense they want to know, right,
Mm-hmm.
then that becomes its own conversation where I can share. Because I do agree it can be really helpful to be sitting with another person and be like, do you get me? Like, do you know what this is like? I think the risk with self-disclosure is that therapists have to be really careful. Are they making it more about themselves? Are they assuming that because they went through something, they automatically know what their client must be going through? I know some therapists run the risk of like, well, this worked for me, so this is what you should also do, when that may or may not be the case. And again, we always really want to be careful about not making therapy about ourselves and about fulfilling our needs. We want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure what we do is as much as possible oriented towards what the client needs. So I don't have a hard stance on it. I'm not like, oh, yes, it's good. No, it's not good. I
Yeah.
think it does depend client to
Okay.
client. I think it's very normal for clients to want to know some details about their therapist's lives because, hey, they're like sharing their life story. They're being very vulnerable. And it's like, wait, like, I need to know something about you. You're just, I don't, I don't know if I
Yeah.
don't think the blank slate would work for me either. Um, but yes, it's hard. It's a
It
hard thing,
definitely
and I think it
depends.
changes over the lifespan of therapy too. Like,
Yeah.
what I think today could change a lot in 10 or 20 years. So,
I think
I know for go
yeah,
ahead.
no, go ahead, finish.
What I was gonna say is I know for me, like, having been a client of therapy for many, many years, I don't personally love a lot of self-disclosure, but I don't like no self-disclosure. So
Okay.
it's a balancing act. And
I
so
think a
I
lot of
guess that's kind of
people seek it more in the beginning when they're trying to like get to know
Mhm.
you. And
Yep.
if we put ourselves in the client's perspective, when you research a doctor for whatever else, you kind of want to know about
Yeah.
them, right? So
Yeah.
here's this couple seeking couples therapy. They want to know, have you ever been married? Do you have kids? Like, who
Of
you're
course.
here telling me
Of
about parenting, but like, are you a parent?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
those are the kind of questions that I normally get, just like superficial, nothing crazy, not like, what was your first love or just they
Yeah, and
kind
I
of want to
always am
get to
like,
know you a little bit to build that
mhm,
therapeutic relationship, or to see like, who are you? You're
mhm.
here, you're gonna sit down, your master's degree, your doctorate, and I want to know who you are as a person besides your license.
Yeah,
And I think that's kind of valid and
yeah,
fair.
100%. I mean, therapy is such a financial and emotional investment of your time, of your energy, of your like vulnerability. And so I'm always of the belief every curious question is a do you get me? Can you understand me? And
Hmm.
so I'm always of the belief no questions off limits whatsoever. It doesn't mean I'll
Yeah,
answer it. But like if you have a question and it's burning in you, like bring it up.
just
We'll talk
ask
about it.
it.
We'll figure out
It's fine.
yeah, yeah, because it's all a bid for connection. It's so much of it is like, well, do you know what I'm going through and can you actually help me? And for
Mhm.
some clients, it's really important that their therapist has. It is important that maybe they're married, that they have kids, that and they have that right. They have that right. You might not have those things and still be able to work that through with them, and that's okay. That works too. But some people will then decide, no, you're not the right provider for me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
They have that autonomy.
Yeah. So conclusion depends. There's no right or wrong. There's definitely ethical guidelines of things you
Yeah.
do not want to disclose, but for the purpose of therapeutic alliance and just regular get to knowing as long as it's pro for the client, you're trying to help them or helps them with their healing, then feel free to self disclose as you may please, as little or as much. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be much, just a little something just gives them that peace of
Oh,
mind.
yeah, again, it's one thing to tell someone, "Yes, I'm married." It's another thing to say, "Yes, I'm married, but oh my gosh, let me tell you about
Let
this
me
fight my
tell
husband and I got."
you, yeah, we got married in 2000, and
Uh-huh,
then
right, then
and
you
now we're
yeah,
not cool. Like
right, well,
TMI.
it's mhm, that's a very different conversation.
In your opinion, why is it crucial for a therapist, a new therapist, an old therapist, to engage in professional development? So to continue their professional development.
Yeah, it is crucial because we need to be constantly advancing
Yeah.
and learning, and if you're just relying on what you learned in graduate school, I'm
You
always
know
like, that's just like
nothing.
the Costco sampler. Yeah, you know something. It's not nothing because I don't want to dismiss
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the rigor of higher education, and I don't want to dissuade people who are trainees or interns who feel already inadequate because you do learn a
No,
lot
you
in school.
definitely learn. I feel like
Yeah.
postgraduate stuff or professional development, it's more like when you decide what your niche is going to be, or if there's something that
Yes.
you're more curious about, then you like go and get this certification, or you get into
Mhm.
these courses to kind of like deepen that theory,
Yeah.
or at least
Yeah.
that's what
It's the
I'm finding it to
specialization.
be. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. So I'm always like, grad school is the Costco samples, like you're getting little tastes of everything,
Yes.
but that does not mean you have the full meal, the full entree, the full effect. But that's okay. And so you sample a bunch of different things. Ideally, you found some ones that you really enjoy, and that is why the professional development matters because that's where you concentrate your efforts. You dive into some kind of theory, you dive into a
Mm-hmm.
certain population, you really get a specialization. Um, I tend to think that makes for more effective therapy because you know exactly who
Yes,
you're supposed to
I
work with
agree.
and you have that specialized knowledge, that specialized training. Clients can feel that too because you're tending to work with people who are similar and you know what you're doing in a sense with them.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. That has been my experience, but it's something they don't really tell you in your graduate degree. I
No,
feel like a lot of things could have been told on my graduate degree. It's like
agreed.
there's no really a written manual. And then if you add all the, like you said, opening your own private practice and billing and insurance, like you kind of just you learn as you go. So it could
Yeah.
be very stressful, especially for new therapists trying to figure out what do I do, what's going to happen after I'm licensed. Do I go to group therapy? I mean, like a group practice? Do I open my own
Practice.
thing? So again, self care.
Yeah.
Self
And
care.
and
Don't drive yourself crazy.
support. Yeah, support and leaning on colleagues. Like I'm always like, hey, go hang out with people smarter than you.
Mhm.
Pick their brains. absorb what they got, because some of it will rub off on you at some point. So, and one step at a time too. Like, I think
Yes.
a lot of times it's easy to get overwhelmed by like, oh, okay, I want to do this, and I'm like already imagining the finish line. We want to break it down, if possible, to more manageable steps.
Yes. And that applies to all your life, one step at a time.
Absolutely, agreed.
To to close down the conversation, what advice would you give to an aspiring therapist or a new therapist or someone who's already in the mental health profession? What insider advice could you give them in regards to their own mental health?
Their own mental health. Yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind is that being a therapist does not grant you immunity from the perils of life. It does not grant you immunity from having your own mental health issues. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're struggling with your mental health, if you're struggling with something that feels dark or something that feels shameful or something that feels not allowed. It is those things that can actually make you a better therapist when you're working through them. It can give you more empathy, more perspective, more resilience. With the caveat, it is really still important to take care of yourself. It is important to get treatment if you're struggling, therapy, medication, lifestyle changes,
Hmm.
mindful, whatever that treatment approach is going to look like. And it's not a cookie cutter formula for everybody. Um, but it is okay to struggle as a human would struggle. And it's important to take care of yourself if you're struggling, because not only for you, it helps your work, it helps your clients. So that's a big takeaway that I give for any new therapist, because I think a lot of times we're just really hard on ourselves, and we do expect that we should have it all figured out, or that we should be cured
Yeah.
somehow of our stuff. That just because we know the coping skills, that somehow that like fixes our pain. They can help, absolutely,
Yes.
but um, I'm not one who tends to believe in cures. I just tend to believe in a more realistic, like we're constantly just trying to take care and manage and
Hmm.
attune to different situations as they arise. And yeah,
Yeah.
and we just have to be gentle. We have to be gentle with ourselves, as gentle as we would with our clients.
Yes. I completely agree. Um, for you, I'm sure with the psychotherapy memes, it's almost like an escape. Like you said, you started using it for just being funny. And now you have a book. So that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I highly recommend reading your book, any new therapist or therapists that are wondering more about this topic. Again, we can continue to speak about this for hours and go into the nitty-gritty of being a therapist and mental health. But for now, this is going to be it. I want to thank you again for participating and allowing this conversation to happen. And I will keep laughing at your memes. I always share them too. And I
Thank
was like, oh my God, to my colleagues, I'm like, this is hilarious. I can relate. I can
you.
relate. I love it.
I'm glad. We are a shared breed, a lot of us. I've learned that through the page. We all think, oh, that's just me. And then we realize, okay,
Hmm,
most of us feel this way at some point or another. I think that's one of the best parts of humor, the shared experiencing
I
of it.
agree.
It's cool.
I agree. I always try to use a little bit of humor when sensible, appropriate, in my sessions. And I think a lot of people appreciate
Yeah.
it. So, yeah.
Gotta know when to laugh sometimes at the absurdity of it all in life.
Not everything has to be that serious, guys. Like, life is life,
Mm.
right? We all go through it. I don't know what to tell you. Laugh about it instead of crying. But hey, well, thank you so much again. Thank you guys for listening or watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. Let us know your thoughts. If you're a therapist, let us know your experience. If you're not a therapist, let us know what you learned today. Okay? I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.